Chapter 72, August 2004. The last week of August, Kevin was anticipating going back to school. I was dreading it. I just wanted to get my GED and be done with it, but Daddy wouldn't agree to it. We would be juniors in high school this year. We hadn't taken any action for Kevin to be emancipated from his parents. Things weren't going that well with them yet. He was still afraid to leave them. We had a performance the night before school started. We mostly performed current hits, but some old classic rock too. We were good, and we had a good many fans and groupies. Life was good. Daddy had been planning to watch our performance. I was excited because he'd gone to maybe 2 of our gigs since I started playing in the band. But then something came up and he had to attend to it. I was let down, but I bit back my disappointment. "I'll see you later," I told him. "Wait, Pumpkin," he said. I turned away from the door to face him. He unexpectedly put his arms around me and held me for a long time. "I love you. You're the world to me," he murmured. When he finally let me go, he grinned and said sheepishly, "I don't know where that came from so suddenly. It just as suddenly seemed like I don't say it enough." "Do you love me more than Kevin and David?" I asked. I blinked in surprise. The words had come out so quickly and unexpectedly, and they had made me feel so weak. He blinked in surprise too. "Yes, I'll always love you more than anyone else. I can't believe you had to ask that." He hugged me to him again and then tightened his hug. "You're such a dad," I smiled back. Yeah, it was okay that he wouldn't make it to my gig. He still loved me, and more than my friends. There'd be other gigs. So what if he had only been to 1 or 2 of them? As I think back on this, there was a word in the back of my mind that flashed through. Dead. But it was so vague, and it flashed through my mind so quickly that I let it drop. There were a good number of times in the past where words or visions or a phrase or a song blinked at me, then left me to wonder what it was all about. Most times it finally made sense a day or maybe up to a week later. Sometimes, but not always. He hugged me once more and said I'd better get moving or I'd be late. Towards the end of our performance, I started feeling weird and thinking about earthquakes, dams bursting, and the like. It ruined my concentration, and I messed up at least a dozen times during our last 2 songs. As we finished, Rick was about to give me hell. I started to say something, but my words died as everything began to turn black. I felt myself falling, but I could do nothing to stop it. When I came to, I was lying on the back seat of Rick's car. I sat up as he was coasting the car to a stop in front of my house. "Oh my God, no!" I exclaimed as I threw open the door and bounded down the walk. I vaguely heard Rick yell after me as I was stumbling into the house. Bob and Nancy were standing in the kitchen, their eyes red. I took one look at them and screamed, "No! My dad isn't dead. He can't be dead!" Even as I screamed those words, I knew that he was. Bob tried to calm me down, but it was no use. Daddy had died from a heart attack, and I knew it. No one had to tell me. I already knew it. I felt as if I had died too. I was angry inside. Why hadn't the voices been more specific? Sometimes they were incredibly specific. There were things I would have said if I'd known this was his last day on earth. There were things I would have done. I would have spent the entire day with him. Oh my God. It was so ironic. The money I had invested in stocks in order to get Daddy a retirement fund had recently grown to an amount over $500,000, and he couldn't use a penny of it. I had planned on telling him about the money in the following month. I was so angry that he had been taken away from me. There were so many things I wished I'd told him and experienced with him before he died. If we had just been able to move elsewhere, I felt that he still might be alive. It didn't make sense, but that's how I felt, and I was angry about that too. In his will, he had appointed Bob and Nancy as my legal guardians. The papers had been signed when the will was written. He had taken care of everything for me. He had willed everything he owned to me, and somehow he'd taken out a $1 million insurance policy on himself. I was a millionaire. Bob and Nancy took care of the funeral services. At the burial, I was silent until Daddy's casket was lowered. At that point, I screamed no and crumbled to the ground. It was at least 100 times more than I could handle. All I remember was seeing Kevin and David's wet, worried faces hovering over me. After that, nothing. The next week I was a zombie. I wouldn't eat or do anything because nothing mattered to me anymore. Life was nothing without the one person I cared the most about. I don't even remember if I cried. During that time, I was vaguely aware of my friends visiting me and of Bob taking me to a counselor to get my head together. I had gone to that space in my mind where nothing mattered, only this time I went a little further. My grief sent me to depths of confusion that I'd never been to before. I was aware that it was the middle of the night, and I remembered how I used to find peace on the roof of a building. I found myself walking along the ledge of a 2-story building which I recognized as the high school, not knowing how I got there. I looked down and felt no fear, but then I'd never felt any fear of heights. Blackness transported me to the tailgate of Daddy's pickup truck where he and I were sitting, discussing why I shouldn't dye yellow a pretty purple color. You'd have to call him Purple then, Daddy explained patiently. I giggled. What would the neighbors say when they saw a purple dog running around, he added. That I'm a handsome purple dog, Yellow told him, but he didn't hear. Blackness again. Daddy was standing under a big oak tree. It wasn't supposed to happen this way, he said sadly. I had planned to see you become that rock star. I'm so sorry. He held me and I clung to him tightly. Promise me you'll take care of Kevin. He doesn't have anybody and he really needs you. He'll always take care of you. Do the same for him. I will, Daddy, I promised as I held on to him tightly. Even though I promised, I somehow still thought that I could stay with him or vice versa. Then I felt something grab me, and I was falling down. A light blinded me as I tried to look up. Then I was being handcuffed and read my rights. I vaguely remember riding in the police car to the station. I slowly came back to my senses as Bob took me home to his house. He was angry at me. Someone had seen me on the roof of the high school and had called the police. I had sat in a holding cell for most of the night. I don't remember any of that. Bob told me that he explained to the police that I had been out of my mind since my dad had died a week earlier, and they had finally released me into his custody. Normally I would have had to go into a psychiatric ward for at least 24 hours because they thought I was suicidal, but Bob knew the police chief. As Bob was chewing me out, all I could think of was, it's only been a day. How could it have been a week? I still hurt. I suppose that I had been totally insane at that moment. I hadn't planned to come back, that was for sure. There was no one here on this earth that loved me now my dad was dead. We had no living relatives. Where would I possibly live? You promised your dad you'd take care of Kevin. It's important you take care of him. Help him, the sheriff insisted as he appeared in the seat between Bob and I. Who's going to take care of me? I thought back bitterly. Have Rick become your guardian, was the answer. So the sheriff thought that a guy that was 5 years older than me should become my guardian, huh? Yeah, I was sure that would work. He didn't even like me half the time. Don't do this, the sheriff told me, but I was already slipping back into level 3, the place in my mind where nothing mattered and that I might not return from. At some point, a scene appeared in my mind in absolute crystal clarity. I saw Kevin and his parents at his house. His mom was arguing with his dad. They got even angrier, and when Kevin tried to intervene, his mom pulled a gun. No! I screamed as she aimed it at Kevin and he fell to the floor, blood pooling around him. No! I yelled again. There was nothing I could do but scream as I searched for his pulse, my hands now covered in his blood, and I found none. I came back to my senses to find myself in the guest room at Bob and Nancy's house, and she was shaking me to my senses. What happened, child? she asked in a frightened voice. You were screaming. There was something on my cheeks, and I reached up to find that I was crying. It's okay, Pumpkin, she said as she wiped my cheeks with a tissue. I know this is hard for you. Nothing was okay. Where's my dad? I have to talk to him, I asked her with an urgent tone in my voice. He would know what to do. Her hand touched my arm gently as she said softly, He died almost 2 weeks ago, Pumpkin. You know that. You have to be strong and deal with it. Almost 2 weeks ago? As I stared at her, totally shocked, she asked, Do you really not know how much time has passed? I shook my head that I didn't. My mental state became much clearer then as I brought myself back from that empty space in my mind. It was like coming out of a fog. I felt that I needed to see Rick. She told me of the changes I'd missed. I found that the house I'd once lived in was for sale. It was too big for me to handle, even if it did sit empty until I was 18. They had moved me into their house. I'd also missed the first days of school and the gig the band had planned. Around noon, 2 days later, I arrived at Rick's doorstep. He looked at me as if I was a ghost. I had snuck out of Bob and Nancy's house. I ignored his reaction and found myself saying, I'm going to New York with you, and so is Kevin. What? Hey, how did you know we were leaving for New York? He asked. I hadn't. It had just hit me as I knocked on the door. I always know things. I think you know that, I replied after a moment. Are you sure you're in a state of mind to go with us? You've been like a robot ever since your dad's death. You've been someone that I've never met, like some other personality. Oh, and let's not forget about you walking on the ledge of the high school's roof and getting arrested. That's been the talk of the town. You also look like shit right now. If I were you, I'd eat something. You look anorexic. Yeah, I was messed up. I'm better now, I replied, hoping that he believed me when I hardly believed it myself. He told me about a friend of his that lived in New York and of all the luck the bands he knew had had. He said that he was thinking of renaming the band Rebel. Carol, David, and him were going to leave without Kevin because he was underage and his mother wouldn't allow him to go, besides the fact that Kevin didn't want to leave me. He still didn't believe that I had pulled myself together again, considering how out of it I had been. I didn't know if I had or not. However, I assured him that I was fine and that Kevin was going with us. But how are you going to pay for this move? And what about Kevin? You're both minors. How are you going to get him out of here without his parents calling the cops on us? He asked. Daddy left me plenty of money. I'll pay for Kevin's expenses. He has to get away from his mother before she kills him. It's all going to work out. I'll call you later, I said as I left to go to Kevin's house. I slid my F-250 to a stop in front of the house. As I walked to the front door, I could hear his mother screaming at him. This time I was going to let her lay a hand on him. I was going to put Georgia Hines in her place. Yeah, isn't that something? The whole time Kevin had been saying that mean old George had beat him up, he had been indirectly hoping that someone would figure out that George was his mother. I burst in the door and his mother immediately began screaming at me. I cussed her out with every ounce of hostility I had in me. Even though she was yelling at me, she suddenly turned around and reached out to slug Kevin. I lunged at her and knocked her down before she could touch him. With strength that I didn't know I possessed, I held her still. Kevin is leaving. I want you to understand that you're not going to contact him. If you ignore this warning, I'm going to fucking kill you. I spat at her and I meant it. I felt that if Kevin was out of the way, she wouldn't get her gun wherever she had it hidden. She knew I was serious. As I held her down, I told Kevin to grab his guitar and some clothes because he wasn't coming back. I thought he would hesitate, but he didn't. His mother cussed and carried on during those few minutes, screaming threats at us. After he had gone out to my truck, I let her go. Maybe the look in her eyes warned her not to hit me. I'm not sure. I only know that she was still cussing me out her front doors. I got into my truck and started it up. Leave quickly, the sheriff told me. No, Kevin yelled as he looked back as I drove away. Before he'd even yelled, "She's got Dad's gun," I had floored it out of their driveway and we were around the corner. She fired 3 times and I heard at least one shot hit the truck. He was in absolute shock and hysterics over what had happened, so I pulled over about a mile later. I really looked at him then. "Oh my God, Kevin, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell someone?" I exclaimed as my heart ripped open. He was battered and bloody. "It was never this bad until the past few weeks when my mother lost her job," he cried. "It isn't fair. Why did all this bad stuff have to happen to us?" "I don't know," I replied, tears streaking down my face. His face was bruised, which made me angry, and when I hugged him, he cried out in pain. All this time his parents had been battering him in the places where the bruises wouldn't show. It made me sick. I told him that he'd never have to worry about his parents' beatings or insanity again. I was going to take care of him from now on, and Daddy would watch over us. I drove to Bob's house and told him what happened and that Kevin and I were leaving to go to New York. "You're doing what?" he exclaimed. "Moving to New York along with Rick, Carol, Kevin, and David." "What do you expect to do there?" "Get experience as a band, land a record deal." "No, ma'am. You're my responsibility and you're not going anywhere," he said firmly. "I have nothing here anymore. I'll only run away if you say no." He turned and noticed Kevin, who had been out of his sight range. His face was swollen and bleeding. He had black and blue marks on him, and it was very obvious that he had been beaten quite severely. "Nancy!" he yelled. She came running out of the kitchen, hearing the tone of his voice, and started asking a ton of questions as she fussed over Kevin. "Nancy, honey, could you take him into the kitchen and tend to him, please?" he asked her in a kinder voice. I knew he just wanted them out of the room. We watched him walk away as Kevin cried and explained the situation. Nancy had always been super sweet to him, and I appreciated her for that. She'd hug him and do her best to wipe away the hurt. Bob turned his attention back to me. "Holy hell, Angel, do you know what trouble you've gotten us into now? It was hard enough for me to get the police chief to release you without charges when you were on the roof of the high school," he told me in a low, angry voice. "Kevin's underage. We can't keep him here. I know his parents and they're bad news. They'll have us thrown in jail for helping him. His mother was going to kill him. She had a gun. I couldn't do anything except get him out of there," I replied in a calm voice. "He's my friend. I couldn't let her kill him. She peppered the back of my truck, Bob, as I spun out of her driveway. At least one of the bullets hit my truck, if you don't believe me." He sat down in his favorite chair and sighed a deep sigh. "Rick is leaving in 2 days from now. Kevin and I need to go with him," I repeated. "It's what we're supposed to do. Legally, you could keep me here, but Kevin needs to get out of here before his parents kill him. I know that for a fact. You saw how he looked. He doesn't deserve what happened to him, and he has no place to go. But we have to hide him right now because the cops will be visiting." Bob had his face in his hands. He was too old for this shit. I knew that, and I hated that it had come to this, but he was the only person I knew I could turn to. He looked up to me. "And where do you suppose we should hide him?" "Your friend Jonas is on the outside of the law. I think he'll know of a place that will be safe," I replied, as I repeated what the voice was telling me. "But wherever he goes, he has to go right now." "Kevin!" Bob yelled then, startling me. "Let's go now!" I nodded to Kevin in agreement right before Bob herded him out the door. "You need to be zoned out of your mind when the cops show up," he informed me, "because if this doesn't go down right, I'm taking you to jail with me. If they talk to you, you deny everything. Am I clear?" Then he was cussing my dad for dying and leaving him in charge of his alien child. I hugged Kevin with the words of 2 days, just 2 days, and this'll be over. And then they left. I hoped that he wouldn't take his anger out on Kevin. He'd been through too much. I realized Bob was a very smart man as I watched him herd Kevin into my truck. If he came back while the cops were there, my truck's engine would be warm for a reason. They wouldn't even look at my truck since the engine was already warm from Bob driving it. If they did decide to look at the truck, they'd see a bullet hole and then we'd be in trouble. I hadn't had a chance to look at the truck, but I knew there had to be a bullet hole in it somewhere. I ran to my bedroom, pulling off my t-shirt because Kevin's blood was on it. I changed into another shirt, washed my face and hands, then I pretended to zone back out into zombie land, although I wished that I really could zone back out. I listened as the cops talked to Nancy and searched the house looking for Kevin. They'd seen me the week before as I was a zombie-like, and so they didn't have much trouble believing that I was innocent of anything Kevin's parents were saying. I mean, how could a zombie girl do what Kevin's mom had claimed? We lived in a very small town, and most of the town knew what his parents were like. They couldn't blame Kevin for running away, which is what they imagined had happened. Bob came home then acting impossibly surprised that the cops were there. I put on a superb act too, being out of it. They left us then. The next day Bob had me call Rick to come over. The three of us discussed me leaving. After 2 hours of discussion, Rick agreed to be my legal guardian. It seems that Jonas also knew a lawyer who knew how to make that happen pretty quietly. I'm not happy with this, he told me as Bob and the lawyer wrapped everything up. Do you think I am? I snapped. My dad is dead, and you're a baby yourself. We packed up my truck that night. Bob had found one bullet hole in the quarter panel and a nice dent where another one had hit and deflected away. I was glad that the cops had never looked at my truck. Girl, you and that boy are lucky you weren't killed, he said with sudden understanding. With the way this town has treated you, I'd get in that truck and never come back. God be with you. I nodded my head. Nancy came into the guest bedroom that had been mine while I stayed with them. Your dad would want you to have these, she said as she handed me a large envelope. I couldn't imagine what she was giving me. I took the bulky envelope, and when I emptied it out on the bed, a stack of photos fell out. They were mostly of me. She picked out different ones and relived the memories. She didn't tell me, but I knew that probably a third of them were ones that belonged to her. Photographs that she or her family had taken of me. Another third of the photos were the ones David had taken of me, with a few thrown in of us and my dad. This small stack of photos is all that's left of my life, I thought to myself as the tears rolled down my face. What a sad fucking life. The last one I held in my hand, it was the one that David had taken of me and Daddy by the shade tree in our backyard. Daddy had been the only one except for Bob and Nancy who cared for me all my life. He'd taken care of me and protected me, and he tried to teach me right from wrong. He had been my world. How was I going to live without him? It will be all right, Pumpkin, Nancy said in a comforting voice, in the same tone that Daddy would have used. Somehow it will all work out. And remember, Bob and I are your family. If it ever gets to be too much, you'll always have a home with us. I was grateful to her and Bob, but I also wondered if it was already too much for me. I could still see Kevin's bloody face and hear the bullets peppering my truck. Maybe they could have kept me safe had I stayed. They just couldn't keep Kevin safe. I was going to have to stay strong whether I felt like it or not. After all, I'd promised Daddy that I'd take care of him. The next morning, as Bob and Nancy sat at the breakfast table with me, they were trying to talk me out of going. They were trying so hard to figure out a way to make things right and for Kevin, but the only solution that seemed to make sense was for us to leave. In Kevin's, David's, and my dreams, our leaving had never looked like this nightmare. If your dad would have only had more time, he would have moved you to Texas like you wanted. He would have given you the world if he could have, Nancy lamented. What? Why do you say that? I asked. I was suddenly very alert. I was sure that Daddy had never given moving a second thought. He loved Mary and his ranch too much, even with all the pain it brought. Because you were right about a lot of things. A lot of things he hadn't faced up to until you mentioned moving. He and I had a really long talk recently, Bob replied as he sipped his coffee. He was ashamed that he couldn't walk away from Mary, and that the ranch took up so much of his time. It might not have seemed it, but he wanted to change into something better for you both. And I think he realized that he should have done more to help you fit in with the other kids, especially when you were a lot younger. He was really regretful about that. He may not appreciate that I'm telling you this, but I told him a long time ago that he should give you more attention and raise you better. But his response was that you already seemed to know all the answers of what the two of you should do. You may not have realized it, but several times when he was at a crossroad, you seemed to come up with the perfect solution. Plus, you were always doing so many things earlier than the other kids. You were driving when you were 6, bush hogging the fields when you were 8. He never saw you as a child. I should have tried harder to make him see the light, and I'm truly sorry about that. I swallowed hard. I felt anger at Mary and at life for taking my dad away when things could have happened to give us a better life. I felt guilt that I hadn't spent more time with my dad, too. I felt sad and angry about what could have been if we just had more time. If I'd only thought about us moving sooner. If fate had been better to us. I felt anger at my dad not being the dad that he should have been, and what Bob had just told me. None of this is your fault, Bob remarked as if reading my mind. And now you're moving, Nancy murmured. Make your life better now, Pumpkin. You have Kevin to lean on, and likewise. Take strength in that. You have each other. That's something to be grateful for. And don't forget, we're always here for you. And you better call me every 2 hours, and then again when you get there, Bob remarked gruffly. He had wanted to drive me there, but one of his daughters had some sort of family emergency, and of course he had to make the situation right. I assured him that Kevin and I would be fine, that we were traveling with 3 individuals of legal age. What I didn't tell him was that if he went, that I was afraid that I'd lose my nerve and not leave at all. The voices in my head had told me long ago that I was a guardian. I certainly didn't feel strong enough to shoulder the burden of being a guardian to my friends when I was the youngest of all of us. How was I supposed to know what to do once we were on our own? I said goodbye to them. Then I picked up Kevin from the address that Bob gave me. Kevin was a nervous wreck from all he'd gone through. I gave him a Valium that I had taken from Nancy's prescription bottles, and he slept peacefully for probably the first time in months as I started the drive to New York, following behind Rick and Carol and David in their cars. Maybe Daddy would follow us there too. Maybe his spirit would guide us all to a better life. The end.